In this lesson, we're going to create the large sliding doors spanning across the entire living area. So we're talking about this area over here. So before you start modeling anything, just like we had done with the other parts, it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with what you're doing and get to understand what frame widths you're working with, what heights you're working with, what exactly you are supposed to be doing. So go ahead and study the plan, study the elevation, and try to kind of, in your head, get a good idea of what your end product is going to be. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to have editable splines that basically run vertically like so, and we're going to be sweeping them with a internal sheet of glass. We're going to group that, and then we're going to move that around and animate it in different open and closed positions so that we can see the effect of this house in the closed and open configuration. So you can also go and have a look at how the entire glazing system is done. For this, I recommend that you turn on the section, or you can have a look at it separately on CAD, and in particular have a look at the area down here. So familiarize yourself with how the frames are working, where the slab edge is, what exactly it's sliding on, what happens against the ceiling, where those frames are placed, and so forth. So since I more or less know the building, I'm going to let you know that in this area over here, sorry for all the excessive zooming and panning, but in the area over here we have a very high number of rails all running parallel to each other. So this rail would essentially be within the slab, and they would be just these very thin edges that the sliding doors would slide along. So because we actually have a floor slab in this area, technically if you really wanted to go into a high level of detail with your project, you would have to cut into the floor slab and show some depth of this internal frame system. So basically the top of these ridges, which are these lines, are flush with the top of the floor. I'm not going to worry too much about that ultra level of detail, since this course mainly wants to work with the workflow of getting the entire process done. I'm not going to spend hours and hours showing you how to do those ever intricate pieces. So I'm just letting you know now in speech so that you can at least decide along your own workflow as to what level of detail you want to show. What we're going to do though is I'm going to outline the bottom of this entire frame system, and we're just going to show that as a very thin frame about 1 millimeter or 2 high, so that we can at least see that being different to the surface of the floor. So let's go ahead and start modeling all of that. I'm going to make sure that I'm on my frames layer. And in my plan view, I'm going to start outlining that frame. So over here, I'm going to choose that frame color, and I'm going to start by drawing that object. So I'm going to pan across using I again, and we can make the whole thing one large layer, remembering that here we have a bit of a split happening in our floor levels. So here I'm going to just basically continue with this contour. And I know that it requires a little bit of time to go around all these small edges, since you need to do quite a lot of panning and zooming. But in no time it will be done. And the good part is that you can go and repeat this on the ceiling, and you can basically use the same shape for your rail. Let's close that off. And that is now going to be one object that we can place on top of our floor slab. So let's go and look at where this is. It's at 2.45, so let's make it at 2.455, or let's make it 52 rather. And we're going to extrude it downwards by let's say 1 centimeter. So we're just going to make it a very thin frame, and it's going to just sit here. So basically that is what our sliding doors are going to slide along. And as I mentioned, I will just repeat it, that if you wanted to do this in more detail, go ahead and create this entire 5 centimeter deep frame with these ridges lining up vertically so that you can get a high level of detail. Very often those tiny details do make the world of difference in high resolution 3D visualization, especially marketing images and so forth. But if you're doing this for an architectural client, then very often they will understand what the sliding door system is, and that they're really just trying to understand the concept of it. They don't need to see every nut and bolt. So again, up to you. So let me just head right along into these doors, and I'm going to start on this side since it is a little bit shorter and simpler. So I'm going to now go and isolate this again, and let's go and zoom in here and start with our first door. I'm going to do each door independently. so that I can group it and move it. And the same thing here as we've done with the other frames. Let's go and draw a line from edge to edge. Let's go and extrude it upwards by 3.5 meters. And this extrusion upwards, you will also have to have a look at where exactly it ends. Since 3.5 is the top of the main slab, so you will have to deduct a slight amount for the thickness of the frame at the top. So let me go do that by turning on the section here. And I'm going to select that section, isolate the two, and just have a look at where this is ending up. So I can see here that in my extrusion I need to bring it down slightly, so let me try 3.45. And you can see now that that is ending here, which is the height of the actual door. So next you want to add a sweep modifier, and that modifier can now be added onto that. You just need to turn it into an editable spline first, so let me just go and convert that to a spline by creating that shape and then deleting my original editable poly. Remember that before you delete it, you can already now choose to go and just convert this into your glass, since you don't really have to delete and recreate. So let's go and do that. I'm going to just make it slightly smaller. Select the inverse, delete the inverse, and then just tessellate to this part. And immediately I can go and apply that to my glass layer. And lastly, give it a shell of 1 centimeter. Now my frame can be swept, and the amount is going to be 5 centimeters. I think it's 5 by 5, just for simplicity's sake, but I can go and check that. So let's look in plan. And let's just get that position to be correct. I think this is going to be slightly smaller. So these are very, very thin frames, and I had gone and looked online to see what the smallest frames are, and these I think are extremely thin, and I had gone and mentioned that in the actual CAD lesson when we were busy drawing this up. It's 2 by 4 centimeters, so this is ultra thin, it's ultra high tech. But for this type of house, I just thought, what the heck, let's add it in and let's be a little bit extreme, and let's get to this type of a design in place where we want to really be promoting ultra thin, sleek, slender design doors. So now I'm busy moving the glass object into place. And if everything has been layered, generally it's a good idea to go and texture this now before you go and move it, since I like to texture things before I group them, and I had explained that about 2 lessons ago why I like to do it. So I'm not going to do the texturing now, since I just want to leave it for the end of the course, but this is a great time for texturing, so just keep that in mind when you're doing your own projects. And I'm going to now go and group it. And by grouping it, I would now be grouping it on the frames layer. So as soon as you select your frames, you're coincidentally going to be selecting that glass object. So just keep that in mind with the texturing. So now we are ready to start multiplying these objects. So I just moved my pivot into the center. So in case you missed that, since I'm doing everything quite quickly, go across to your hierarchy tab. Click on Effect Pivot Only, Center to Object, and that will basically just center that pivot right there so that you can at least have it close to your object. So now you can go and work only with your sliding door objects that you want to go and instance around your model, or at least around the plan. So I'm going to lock that selection by pressing spacebar. Using my snap, I'm going to snap it onto that second piece, and I can see here already that the width is slightly different just because of these spacing issues. So I'm going to make a copy. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to open that, and I just need to modify that slightly. So I'm going to just pull out that frame. As soon as it's selected, I'm going to grab that outer edge and then just snap it onto the outside. And the same thing with my glass, I'm just going to move that slightly outwards. And you can also go and do that in plan. Just going to move that into the frame, close my group back down again, and then just repeat my copy command. So in this case, I think that we can instance it since it is the same size. So it's just the last one at the end that had to be pushed in slightly. So I'm going to off camera do the rest of the frames for you. You're not going to have to watch me recopy all of this. But basically this is what I wanted to get to at the end of this lesson. A set of doors which I can now select by clicking once, and I can go and move these doors along this line, so I can basically open and close them, and these can now go and all be animated, which we're going to do later in the course once we get to that stage. So in the beginning of the next lesson you will see the rest of the doors already all copied. I'm going to follow exactly the same process as what I've shown you right now in this lesson, and we're going to then continue modifying and editing these doors to perfection in the next lesson.